In this video, we'll take a look at a new ability in Alpha Anywhere to do precise WYSIWYG layout of sections of a UX component. So let's start out by looking at how a UX component is laid out by default. So we've placed a number of fields here on this UX component here, and you can see that we've turned off the break after first name and after city and state. So when we render this component, each control is rendered at its default size, which is approximately 2 inches wide, and you can see that first name and last name are on the same line. Then there's a break, and then address 1, address 2 on the next line, and then city, state and zip are all on this the same line, and there's a default spacing of 4 pixels between each control. I think it's actually 8 pixels because it's 4 pixels on each side. So this is the default layout, but what if you wanted to actually control the exact size and placement of each of these controls? And the reason that you might want to do that is, for example, if we look here at this component over here, we've got an absolute layout, and if we go over to working preview, you can see that we've taken a PDF form and used it as a background for our UX component, and we've placed our input controls at precise locations over the bitmap background. So the UX component is acting as a standard form, but the IRS 1040 form is being used as a background. So we'll get back to this particular form later on, but let's go back now to our simple example over here and show how you can turn on absolute positioning of controls. So we'll go back to design mode now, then we'll go here and select all of these controls, and then go to containers, and we'll wrap all of these controls here in a container. So there we go, and now there's a new container type here called absolute layout. So when we place an absolute layout container around a series of controls, we can then go to the absolute position for controls builder here and place all of these controls within this container. So if we go to working preview now without having placed any controls, we're going to get an error telling us that we haven't placed any of the controls yet. So now let's go ahead and open up the builder. So we'll click on the smart field now, and you can see that the builder opens up, and what we have in the builder here is a list of all of the controls that are in the absolute layout container. Now you can have as many absolute layout containers as you want, and in fact you can even nest absolute layout containers if you want, but right now we only have one absolute layout container, and here are the controls that this container has. The size of the container is defined by the border on this canvas over here. So we can go here and we can change the size, and that's reflected here in the property sheet. We could go change the size over here, and that would reflect back over here. So now we need to take these controls and place them at absolute positions on this canvas. So let's just click on the first control, first name, and then we draw the position of the control where we would like to place it. So as you hold down the mouse while you draw, you can draw out the size of the control, and you can see now that's placed the first name control. First name has gone bold over there, and then we've automatically moved on to the next control, and then you can see that the prop sheet on the right hand side tells us the width and the height of the control that we've just placed, and also the position of the control. Now as we start moving the control, you can see that the actual control itself shows you what the height and width and position are as you're dragging. So now let's go and take the last name control and place that on the canvas, and you can see that as we are drawing this control, as soon as I align this with the bottom of the first name control, a blue line shoots across the entire width of the canvas, telling me that the controls are now aligned. So let's go there and make it a little bit wider. So now we've placed 2 controls on the canvas. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our video on the absolute layout container, and at this point now we've placed two controls on the canvas, first name and last name, and we can see here that the first name control is 171 pixels wide and last name control is 193 pixels wide. So let's assume that we'd like those two controls to be the same width. So I'm going to go to the first name control now. So this is the so-called first selected control, and then do a shift click to select both controls, and then go here and say match size of the first selected control. And now you can see that we've made first name and last name. Let's go back there and say clear selection. So first name is 171 now, and last name is 171. So we've gone now and easily made both controls the same width. Now let's go take the address field and place that on the canvas, and you can see now that the blue line that shoots down is telling me that the address control is currently positioned left aligned with the first name control, which is what I want. And I want the right edge of this control now to match the right edge of the last name control. So I can just keep on dragging, and as soon as I get there you can see that the vertical marker shoots down to tell me that I'm now aligned. And at this point now I've got my address 1 field there. Let's go now and choose the address 2 field. Then we'll go there and choose the city field, which will go over to there, then the state field, which we'll do over there, and then finally the zip field, which we'll do over there. So now I've got the bottom aligned on the zip field but not the top, so let's just go there. Okay, got that aligned now. So now we basically have our form, and we can now use these editing options over here. If you choose more than one control, you can see that there's a whole series of commands that help you lay out the controls very easily. So you can align them left, center, top, middle, etc. You can also align them relative to a reference control, which would be either the first selected control or the last selected control. You can distribute the controls evenly over the layout, and then you can match the size, the width, or the height of controls. Also, at any point in time, if you don't like what you've done, you can obviously go and do an undo and then a redo. So let's go and do a bunch of undos there, and then go and do a bunch of redos. So now we've basically done our redos over there. And furthermore, you can go here and you can export your settings. So here are all the settings, and then you can also import settings that you've done from on one layout into another layout. So now let's go click the OK button right now and go over to working preview, and now we can see that we've got an absolute layout for all of these controls in our absolute layout container. So now let's go, for example, and put some other controls on that are not in the absolute layout container. So let's go here, for example, and put in, say, some buttons. So there's some buttons, and then so now if we go back to working preview, we can see that the buttons are underneath the absolute layout container, and if I go and turn the brake off there, then I'm going to see this button to the right of the absolute layout container. So in other words, the absolute layout container is like any other control in a UX component, in that it flows from left to right just like any other control, and if you put a break in, then it'll move on to the next line. And as mentioned earlier, you can have nested absolute layout containers as well. So let's pause now and then pick this up in the next video. So continuing now with our video on the absolute layout container, let's look now at putting a background image on the absolute container. So as mentioned earlier, one of the primary motivations for the absolute layout container is so that you can use an image of a form. Typically it'll be an image, say, of a PDF form, and then use that as the background of your absolute layout container, and then place the controls at precise positions so that they are over the controls shown on the form. So let's go and first just demonstrate using just some simple image that doesn't necessarily represent a form. So I'll just turn on this check marks that says has background image, and then let's go and choose an image from our web project. So you can see we have a bunch of images here, but I'm going to just go and choose this very simple image, which is just a scene. And now if I go over to the builder, now I can see that if I click on the background image, we can see the background image now shown behind our form. So the ability now to toggle the background image on and off is useful, because if you actually have a complex form shown as the background here, it can be difficult to see where the fields are, so you can just go and toggle those background images on and off. And now let's go over to working preview, and we can see now that here's our form with the background image. But now let's go for example and choose a more meaningful background image. So you can see now if I go here and I'm going to choose this first image here, which is a portion of the IRS 1040 form. So I'll go ahead now and click OK. And now when I bring up the builder, we can see now here are the fields. Let's just make this just a little bit bigger, and let's go and first of all just clear all the fields. So I'll say select all, and then I'll hit delete. So now we've cleared all the fields, and we can see here that this is where the first name field should go. So I'll just select first name and then just start drawing that out, and now I've placed the first name field on the form. So now we can go here, and let's also make this bigger over there. So now we've made that bigger, and then let's just go ahead. It's still not big enough, but just for the time being we'll leave it at that. Now go over to working preview here, and we can see that there's the first name field that's been positioned directly on top of the first name field on the underlying IRS form. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our video on the absolute layout container, and we're showing now how you can use a bitmap that was created from the IRS 1040 PDF form as a background to your absolute layout container. So now let's just take a look here at this form carefully here, and we can see that on the IRS 1040 form there are a bunch of questions here that have square boxes, which would make you think that they might be checkbox controls, but in actual fact a person can't be single, married, and married filing separately all at once. So this is really a radio button control, not a checkbox control, even though the IRS has chosen to use a square border here and not a round control as is the standard convention for radio buttons in HTML forms. And furthermore, you can see that there's a very explicit layout of these controls. If I go here and make this container a little bit bigger, let's just go here and open it up a little bit further. So I'll just go there and move this all the way over there. We can see that that the radio button has some of its items over here and then some of its items over here. Now normally when you put a radio button control on a UX component in Alpha Anywhere, the individual buttons are placed automatically by Alpha Anywhere. You don't have control over the individual placement. So now we're going to look at a new feature in the absolute layout builder as used with radio buttons and checkboxes, that gives you explicit control over the position of each choice in a radio button group as long as the choices are a static list. This option is not available for a dynamic list because obviously you don't know how many choices are going to be in the dynamic list. So let's go now and just create a new component here, just so that we have a simple test case to demonstrate the feature. And I'm going to go here now and just create a brand new UX component, and I'm going to go now and choose a radio button. So here's my radio button, and I'll just call it, say, filing status, and then I'll just go and choose some choices for this control. So I'll just go here and just type in married, single, married to, which would be the second option, and then I'll just type in some other options. I'll just give them some arbitrary names, X, Y, and Z. So now if we go and render our radio buttons, we can see that we have them laid out by alpha, and if I go here and change the width to, say, 5 inches, then you'll see how they all render in a single line. But this obviously wouldn't allow us to position these controls at an absolute location on top of the background form. So let's go now and take this control and wrap it in an absolute layout container. So here we have the control in an absolute layout container, and then let's go to the well, first of all, let's just go here to the container itself and position it. So I'll just make this into a nice big container, and then I'll just position it over there, for example. So now what I'm going to see is that there's the absolute layout container, and I've just moved all of the controls, the whole control, to its new absolute location, but I haven't been able to actually individually place each one of these controls. So let's go back now and look at a new option on this radio button called custom layout when in absolute layout container. So I'm going to check this box now, and now when I go back to the absolute layout builder, I'm going to see that I can place each individual control. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our video on the absolute layout container, and we've just gone to this radio button and specified that that the individual controls can be placed in the absolute layout container by checking this custom layout when in absolute layout container property here. And then there's another property here called suppress labels when in absolute layout container. So let me initially turn that off, and then go now back to the builder for the absolute layout positioning. And now you can see that instead of seeing a single control here called filing status, I see 6 individual controls which represent each of the static choices for this radio button. So I can go there and position the first control over there, the second control over there, the third control over there, the fourth control over there, say the fifth one over there, and the sixth over there. Now this obviously doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it does demonstrate the point here. So now when I go over to working preview, I can see now that the individual radio buttons have been positioned at explicit locations on the canvas, but we still have each of the labels here. Now presumably the background image that represents our form has the labels on it, so we don't necessarily want to see these labels from our controls. So let's go back now and check this suppress labels when in absolute layout container. So now when we go over to working preview, we can see that the individual labels for each one of these controls has been suppressed. But as noted earlier on the IRS form, the radio buttons actually look like checkboxes. They have a square border around them. So let's go back now to this radio button and then check this property here that says has custom design for radio button appearance, and then open the builder, and then let's go over here and specify that the checkmark border radius is not 10 pixels but 0 pixels. And now if we look at it, we can see each of these items now is square, And then let's also go and make the actual box a little bit bigger. So let's go and make it, say, 22 pixels by 22 pixels. And now if we go here, we can see that this is they're all bigger now. Now you can see that we should have gone here and set a label indent that is bigger than 20 pixels, because the label is overlapping the actual check mark there. But it's not that important, because in our real form we've turned off the labels. But let's just, for the sake of neatness, go ahead here and just make that, say, 25 pixels. And there we go. And then finally, let's change from using a checkbox control to maybe just using a color swatch. So I'll go there, and I'll say has a background color, and now we can see that we've just done that over there. So now let's go ahead to our working preview now, and we can see there are our radio buttons that look like checkboxes and positioned at absolute locations at different points on the screen. So now that we've seen how to position radio button and checkbox controls at absolute locations, let's go back to the IRS 1040 control and see how that was done. So when we go back here to design mode here, we can see that this filing status field is a radio button. But again, we've chosen here to position each individual choice in the radio button group individually, and we've suppressed labels, and then we've gone and so we can see here that we have our design for our radio buttons, and we've turned off the border style completely on the radio buttons, because the PDF form has a square border around each one of those choices. So go back now to design mode and then go over to working preview. So let's pause now and pick this up. So we're continuing now with our video on the absolute layout positioning of controls on a UX component, and we're looking at a UX component that is using an IRS 1040 PDF form as a backdrop. So when we go now to working preview, we can see now that we can fill in fields on the first pane, and then because the IRS 1040 form is quite long, having a one long continuous form would become unwieldy. So you can see that we've divided the form up into different logical sections here. So there's our first section, and then here's page 2, and there's page 3, and we did that by basically creating a standard tab control. So you can see here's our tab control, and we've made 3 different panes on this tab control, and then on each pane we've created an absolute layout container. So for example, here's the absolute layout container for pane 1, and there would be the builder for that pane, and then for pane 2 we have another absolute layout container with some additional fields, and then when we bring up the builder here, we can see here's the builder for pane 2, and then again here that would be the builder for pane 3. So the ability to take a large form and break it up into different logical sections, each organized with tab controls, is very powerful. But you can see here that we're moving from one page to the next page by clicking on the pane tab buttons, but we can just as easily go to this tab control and set the tab to be genie style. So now you cannot move, you can't move to arbitrary panes. You have to move through the form in this genie mode. So now we're on step 1, now we're on step 2, and then we would be now on step 3, excepting that we have a validation rule that says that you can't move off this pane until you filled in this field, and there's the error message coming up. So until we go and actually fill in that field there, we can't move on to pane 3. So now we're on pane 3. So you can see that we've used validation rules in this form. So if we go now to field 3, we can see that here's our validation rule that says that that's a required field. So when we're in genie style, we can't move off this pane until we've completed all of the fields that are required and satisfied all of the validation rules, some of which might have required AJAX callbacks to the server. So Genie mode gives you a very powerful way of allowing the user to move through the form. So I'd like to also point out some other things that we've done on this form. So let's just turn off Genie mode temporarily now and go back to working preview. You can see that because the 1040 form is pretty dense, it can be quite difficult to sort of pick out where the actual fields are and what has focus. So you can see that when I click in the first name field now, we're putting a red border and a yellow background around the form that makes it very obvious as to which part of the form has focus. So let's go and take a look now at how that was done. So I'm going to go back to design mode now and then go back to my properties, and then I'm going to look at local CSS definitions, and you can see we've simply defined a CSS class called input with a subselector of focus, and this basically says that for any input controls that have focus, make the background color yellow and make the border 2 pixels solid and then red. So that's how we placed the focus rectangle around the field that that had focus. So now let's pause now and pick this up in the next video and talk about the final aspect of absolute layout, and that is using the absolute layout container in a responsive design. So we're continuing our video now on absolute layout, and we're going to now talk about how you can use the absolute layout container in a responsive design. So let's go back to design mode right now, and let's put this absolute layout container in a panel. So we'll go there to panels, and we'll wrap it in a panel card, and then let's turn on mobile preview, and let's also switch to the iOS style over there, and then click OK, and then go over there and take a look at it in let's switch now to, say, iPad vertical mode. And let's say now that what we'd like to do is design a layout that is laid out differently but still absolutely depending on the orientation of the device. So let's go back now to controls and then switch over to properties, which is where we can define the responsive layout settings. And we'll go to the builder now, and let's import a rule set that defines 2 rules, one for landscape and one for portrait. And then let's go here and add an action, and the action that I'm going to choose is define position for controls in an absolute layout, and then I'm going to choose my absolute layout container. So you can see now that we have 2 rules, one called landscape and one called portrait, and then one action called define position. So now what we can do is we can go to portrait here, for example, click the builder now and define the absolute position for all of these controls when we're in portrait mode. So we'll go over here, let's make the control itself a little bit bigger, and we'll say when we're in portrait mode we'd like to just place all of the controls like this, one underneath the other. So I'll go there and there and there and there, and then finally there, and then I'll select them all. So and I'll match the width of the first selected, I'll match the height of the first selected. I could have just chosen size, and I'll go to first selected and align left. So now I've got everything nicely laid out. So that's going to be my rule for portrait. And now let's go to landscape and then open up the builder here, and for landscape we're going to go like this, and I'm going to go here like this for landscape. First name, last name, let's just make that a little bit bigger, go to address 1, city, state, and then zip. So go there and just get that nicely aligned, and then let's go make all of the controls the same height. So we'll go there and then we'll match the height of the first selected, and then click OK. And now we'll go and let's preview our component. So there we have, let's go to the phone. So there is the iPhone vertical. We've got an absolute layout for all of the controls, and then when we switch to horizontal mode, you can see we have a different layout. Now we made a layout that was too big for a phone, so let's just test it out on a vertical iPad and horizontal iPad. So what we've shown over here is how you can use absolute layout positioning and sizing even when you're using the responsive layout features of the UX Builder. So what we've shown in this series of videos here is very powerful absolute layout positioning of controls in a UX component for special situations. In most cases, I think that the automatic layout of controls in the UX component is the way to go, because it's so easy and the controls just lay themselves out perfectly. But in special situations, especially when you want to use a bitmap image of a form as a backdrop, the absolute layout container is a very powerful new feature in the UX Builder. Thanks very much for watching.